You're listening to Dodge Movie Podcast. Your hosts are Christy and Mike Dodge, the founders of Dodge Media Productions. We produce films and podcasts, so this is a podcast about films. Join them as they share their passion for filmmaking.
Welcome back, everybody, and it feels like a very much a welcome back, a little behind-the-scenes tidbits for y'all. We have been away from the microphones for about a month, and so I want to give a big shout out to our audio editor, Jeff Vrymoot, for keeping things running, and to Melissa for doing our social media. So you guys had no idea that we've been on a break for about a month because they have been keeping the train moving, and we are so appreciative for both of their efforts. So
thanks.
Thank you. All right, we're kicking off this month of college films with a movie that is really close to Mike's heart and a movie that I enjoyed rewatching. Okay, I have to explain why we're laughing. I slept through the first half because we just gotten back from vacation and I was exhausted. But I've seen this movie recently because we rewatched it with our kids, and I've seen it before. The movie we're talking about today is Real Genius from 1985, starring Val Kilmer. And I really implore you all to go watch the documentary that is on Amazon Prime right now, because he has been filming himself since he was a wee tot. And you get a lot of great behind the scenes stuff about each of the films, but him as a human being. And I just think it's really cool. And so it made watching Real Genius entertaining, I'll say.
I have to say, I don't really know why people think actors are narcissists.
Well, and a little side note, I didn't really care for Val Kilmer. And I think part of it is the characters that he picked in the 80s were all jerks. So I think I projected that behavior onto his real person. And so seeing the documentary made me realize, like, oh, he isn't a jerk. He's just a really good actor.
After Top Gun, who knew we would like him better than Tom Cruise, right?
Exactly. So in this month of college films, we are not going to talk about some of the more popular films, Animal House, Revenge of the Nerds, Back to School, because quite honestly, I get a little icky feeling around some of those. They obviously could not be made today, and looking back with our current woke eyes, it's just hard for me to kind of watch some of those. So we are going to stick with some newer films.
Well, I think the nerds were technically pro the, triple delta lambdas or whatever. Did they join a black fraternity? So maybe they were leading the way.
Okay, but some of their other behavior was questionable.
It's been a while since I've seen that film.
Yes, myself as well. So we're recusing ourselves, but that is why shout out to Elizabeth Case, who requested Animal House. Mm-hmm. And although Animal House has that Oregon connection, I grew up in the backyard. Every time I would pass the fraternity that was used in the film, there's great Oregon pride for having films made in our backyard. But anyway, all that being said, we're sticking with, except for Real Genius, we're sticking with some more modern college films that we think you'll like. And we think we've picked some that aren't super popular also. And so that fits in with our kind of more indie vibe, where we like to pick movies that maybe not everybody's heard of.
Off the beaten path.
Right. But Real Genius is not one of those. I'm sure everybody's heard of it.
Really, though? I don't know.
Well, let us know if I'm wrong.
Yeah. The listener should write in and tell us if they've seen Real Genius or even heard of it.
Yes, please. And before we get started on our normal programming notes, Mike, this is a special movie for you. Do you want to talk about that?
So Real Genius is obviously set at Caltech, although they call it Pacific Tech for some reason. And I spent some time at Harvey Mudd College. I wouldn't even say a rival in that area because we stole their canon. And so they're our rival maybe, but it really captured what I felt like in the 80s was the culture of the science and engineering schools for the super bright kids. There was a lot of it that really rang true to me. In particular, the one scene where they're all studying and the one kid just stands up and starts screaming and loses it and flees. And the only reaction is one of the other students gets up and takes his place at the table. That just resonated so much with me. Like, oh yeah, I know that.
You saw lots of breakdowns kind of while you were there?
Yeah, they had this thing. It was in the movie, they call it the exam decompression zone. Mm-hmm. And At Mud, they had something called noisy minutes. During finals, you're supposed to be quiet most of the day, but it was, I think, an hour, like 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock in the evening, where you could go freak out and scream and do whatever to get out the stress. And so Westorm would purchase a derelict vehicle from a junkyard, and then you could take swings at it with sledgehammers and baseball bats and things like that, beat the crap out of it. And then at the end of the finals week, they'd have it towed back to the junkyard.
Wow. It reminds me of my favorite scene in Summer School, little known movie with Mark Harmon, although one Nathan Emmons knows of that film.
And me.
Yes, and you. It's during, I think it's like a SAT, and the guy just like lets out this blood-curdling scream, and then he just calmly goes, "Tension breaker, had to be done," and then moves on.
Also, Courtney Thorne-Smith was in Summer School.
Yes. All right, on to Real Genius. So this 1985 film directed by Martha Coolidge, there are 3 writers, Neil Israel, Pat Proft, and PJ Torokiv. The synopsis for the film is Mitch Taylor is one of the youngest students ever accepted to a university known for its program for geniuses. He partners up with his roommate, science club legend Chris Knight, on a project to develop a high-powered laser. Together with their hyperkinetic friends, they employ their intellects in the pursuit of bigger blasts, practical jokes, and a deeper understanding of what a real genius means. When they find out that their professor intends to turn their work over to the military for use as a weapon, they decide to get even. And when I read this synopsis prepping for this episode, I realized this probably came out during War Games.
Very close.
And
I think War Games was like 83, but it was pretty much right in that era.
In that Cold War era where young people, or maybe just some people were against the war efforts. But the reason I say young people is because War Games, wasn't he in high school?
Yeah, high school.
Yeah, and he is thwarting like a military action. So I thought, oh, interesting, to look back and see the trends in movies. And I don't think it's an accident that these 2 films kind of, have similar topics.
Right. And before someone thinks that it's a goof that Mitch is 16 when he goes to Caltech, I will mention that one of my friends at Mud, Susan Cohn, was 16 when she came to Mud, which is amazing just to get in anyway, but to do so 2 years early is stunning.
And then just what does that do to a person
when
you're surrounded? The pressure.
And she was friends with us, so that was also an additional disadvantage.
Oh, that poor dear.
I know. There's a reason she's hidden. She's changed her name and gone into maybe witness protection or something.
So the tagline for this film is "You need brains to act this crazy."
And that's about accurate.
Yeah. So why don't you kick us off? What's the pickup line of Real Genius?
Crossbow, this is Watchdog. It actually comes from a fake advertisement video, but the fun fact is the person credited with saying that line is Stacy Peralta. I believe that's of the Bones Brigade era skateboarding Stacy Peralta.
Yeah, I forgot to go through who is in this. So besides Val Kilmer, Mitch Taylor is played by Gabriel Jarret, and then Michelle Meyrink, who I recognized from like probably later films.
Probably not much later. She was big in Valley Girl and this, and then according to IMDb, she pretty quickly thereafter stopped acting professionally.
I think it was Valley Girl that I remember her.
Moved back to Vancouver, British Columbia, where she runs an acting school.
Aha, look at you.
We could go find her.
And then character actor William Atherton, and then Laszlo is played by John Grise, who, if any of you are watching White Lotus right now, he is the older gentleman that makes it with Jennifer Coolidge.
The BLM guy.
Yeah, the BLM guy. And then Stacy Peralta, as you mentioned. So the thing that I noticed that was pretty ridiculous of this opening scene, it's like this war room where we see kind of the antagonists of the film, the military, plotting what they're going to do with this laser that is being developed at the college. It's a dark conference room, which anybody who has been in any sort of business, especially like if it's government, they're usually like stark
beige. They're ugly and they have bad fluorescent lighting.
Yes, that just
kind of hums over you and sucks the light out of you. This to me very much looked like the location couldn't find a good conference room, and they had a sound studio and they put them in the middle of the open area and lit 3 guys with spotlights above them and called it a day.
Yep. it was pretty ridiculous.
Yeah. They're also, the characters, the writing in there, they're a little bit kind of over the top and melodramatic. And there's a line where somebody says, so it's both immoral and unethical, and then chuckles.
Right. Well, I did make note that there are 2 separate times when someone stands up for kind of what is right, or, you know, what is being portrayed as being the correct way to go. And both times they're African-American dudes. And I thought, wow, very progressive in the 80s that the one military guy that just cannot take this is a black guy. And he stands up and he's just like, I can't do this. And then that's the line that follows, is what you just said.
Right. But then they snuff the poor guy. It's implied.
Right.
So again, the black guy doesn't make it. But
that's true. All my propping up just was dashed.
And so there's a line in there where one of the evil guys says, I haven't had a working weapon since Korea. And I think that's supposed to be a joke about his penis.
I think so.
But it establishes a certain campiness to the humor in this film. Mm-hmm. And as you go through the film, the character of Chris Knight, played by Val Kilmer, has a lot of very, very funny lines. And I remember the first time I saw this film, I remembered many of those lines because they were very funny, which I find interesting because of what you had learned in either the documentary or his book, right, about his opinion of the script.
Right. He went to the director and he said, let me play with the script a little bit. And the director was like, no, stick to the script. And he's like, but you have all these really funny people in this film and you're not letting them play. You're not giving them the space to do what they're good at. And I guess the script was written, the wording of the script was not funny. So it was like they hired all these very comedic people, but then gave him a straight script. And he was like, come on, let's just play a little bit. So he talked the director into it.
And I remembered the film as being funny. So I thought that was an interesting tidbit.
Right. Yeah. I got that from his book that I just finished reading. I guess I kind of went down a Val Kilmer rabbit hole.
A little bit so.
Yeah. I loved the show don't tell of his, like when we first meet him, it's from a pan from his feet all the way up to his head, which his feet are donned with some very colorful like Vans, very topical of the era. And then to a silly t-shirt, it says, I love toxic waste. And then he's wearing like little baubles on a headband on top of his head. So he's like the stereotypical kind of like crazy scientist.
Wacky weatherman.
Right. So it tells us who Chris Knight is. And we've already heard his name from the science fair when the young kid kind of gets accepted into college. Isn't that how you were told you got to come to the college of your choice, was somebody visited your science fair? The head of the department visited your science fair?
Well, I was certainly not as heavily courted as Mitch was. I was and also ran. They needed to fill out their numbers, apparently. They had not enough people in the leg length discrepancy category, so they had to throw one in there. I thought it was interesting that the costume designer did research by hanging out at Caltech. And apparently they had this quote that these people look like they got dressed in the dark. And I really did appreciate that. However, I will say that when I attended MUD, there are some people there that were attractive and had their clothing options dialed in. We did not have nearly as many funny t-shirts, though. So my question was whether the costumers made those themselves or were they able to source them from somewhere?
I know they made one of them because the one that Val wears, it's like the International Loyal Order of Gorillas, is a gag on his stepdad who belonged to some Rotary type group. And so he was poking fun at that with that t-shirt. So I know that t-shirt was made. I don't know if the I Love Toxic Waste or others the Val wore.
Yeah, Surf Nicaragua, etc.
Yes, that one. Yeah. He says he gets a big kick because people will come to Comic-Con with knockoffs of the shirts from Real Genius.
Well, now it's kind of trivial with all these online printing places, right?
Right. But still, somebody had to burn some calories to...
Oh, yeah, but I was just more talking about in 85 during production. Yeah. If they did them themselves, that was a fair amount of work.
Yes, true enough.
I hope they got like a batch of 25 and gave the rest to all the crew.
Especially to make him look worn, because his, it didn't look like brand new off the presses.
Yeah, although knowing Val, he may have worn them for 3 months straight beforehand. Just
true enough to get into character.
Yeah.
Yes, very true, very true. So what of the cinematography did you think of this film?
Well, you already mentioned the tracking shot on the shoes to open up, which I thought was really good storytelling because it contrasted the crazy shoes with the kind of weenie dress shoes. There was a lot of shots from inside the closet. And, this is very close to shooting inside an elevator. So it's near and dear to my heart.
Yes.
But if you'll notice, they did kind of like other brilliant filmmakers do. They had a variety of different angles from inside the closet, so I'm positive that they were able to remove one of the walls to move the cameras around. Mm-hmm. They had a couple of different montages, which I also like. And then they did a trick in there, which I recognized from Arrival. It's when, at the midpoint of the film, Mitch is in an office calling his mom, and unfortunately is recorded and then later embarrassed. But the camera dollies across the doorway, and then the camera actually pans as it dollies to slowly bring him into view. I thought that was a really nice technique. One thing that came to my mind that I certainly noticed, and I'm not sure how I feel about it, is when Chris goes to Hathaway's house and he first meets the character of Susan. Mm-hmm. And she's talking to him. At the end of the conversation, they're talking, there's a bar of light across just her eyes. It's really noticeable. Her forehead and the rest of her face is still in shadow. I don't know, like practically in the scene where you would get a bar of light or why the cinematographer, the lighting department thought that was reasonable. It was really noticeable.
I bet you it was late at night.
Yeah.
It was what we call the champagne shot.
I always I just want to go home.
Yeah. Oh, this light will do.
Yeah. Like, okay, do we bring the giant panels? No. Somebody here, quick, bring
just
a flashlight.
Hold this.
Yeah.
Yeah. What did you think about the writing of the film? You said that it was pretty accurate. Somebody obviously either knew somebody or went to Caltech.
From my reading, the writers did not attend, but they did research, and they did great research because they really did, I feel like, capture kind of the spirit and the feel of a school like that in that era. And I say in that era because from talking to students who attended Mudd 5 years ago, it's much, much different now. And I'll be honest, maybe I'm an old man thinking with nostalgia back to my youth, but I do think they've lost a little bit of something. There was a playfulness there and an inquiry that those students had, that you saw these young gentlemen in this lab messing around with some pretty advanced stuff. And that's kind of cool. I think that to have that opportunity for those young people to expand their minds and go in all these different directions and kind of be given a wide open field. And I think unfortunately now it's probably not the case, right? You probably don't have the ability to make an ice rink in a dorm. I just feel like people would be like, oh no, you can't, somebody might get hurt, Whereas certainly in that era, they captured that sense of playfulness very well.
How realistic do you think it is that the students wouldn't know that what they were working on could be used for nefarious purposes?
It's interesting you bring that up because Harvey Mudd was founded with the intent of producing scientists and engineers who did have that context of what they were doing. The founder was very concerned about the Manhattan Project and that the people who worked on the nuclear bombs didn't really understand the implications until it was too late. So I do think, unfortunately, that is fairly realistic that some people would be ignorant. I do think today the students would be very much more aware of it than perhaps we were back in the mid-'80s.
Mm-hmm. Because I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
I remembered the other black person there was a student in the lab, and he was also, I think, one of the first ones to say, wait, no, you can't do this, or do you know what he's doing? And I thought, oh, wow, they're actually letting the black student be the one that kind of is the first one to figure out that something is awry.
And Kent, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Nordic king, is a weenie.
Yeah.
So, yeah, definitely they were kind of pushing the boundaries on racial depiction there, I guess.
Yeah.
But, yeah, and we also saw there was a character of Japanese ethnicity who was not portrayed as Long Duck Dong, right? He was just another character. And then we have the character of Jordan, played by Michelle Meyrink, who is really not a stereotypical feminine character, but has even a line in there where she comments I'm not gay, because she has short hair and wears overalls and is very construction oriented. So I thought that character was really well done because they showed that just because she was female didn't mean that she either had to be girly or a lesbian.
Right. And she even is kind of a love interest, but on her own terms, not just the woman thrown in there to be the love interest. Yeah, she has her own arc.
And she needs no saving.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. In fact, she's part of the saving.
Right. She is probably the most competent person in the film.
I thought that the kind of just the sets or the overall vibe, like they did film at Occidental and they filmed at Pomona.
Mm-hmm.
And
Moaners.
What's that?
We called them moaners. The kids who went to Pomona.
And then just like putting us in that era with the music. It was very much that 80s synth music. And, like the dorms, it was obvious that it wasn't simply just a soundstage, that there was, the writing on the walls of the dorms. And
that I can't believe. It's possible, but I wouldn't think that the set designer did all that writing on the walls. In particular, there's one part where it says Caltech versus MIT. And that felt to me like they actually shot in a real dorm hall, but they may have done it because they did make ice and they did make popcorn for this film. I think the budget must have been pretty big.
Yes, I will get into that in a bit. Did you mention any editing things? Nothing stood out to me.
I didn't notice on the editing. For the sets, I had a couple of things in addition to kind of that. When you mentioned the realism, the gas cylinders along the sides of the walls in the laboratory building chained down, I remember that from Mud. There was, helium, oxygen, what have you, in these gas cylinders. And because if they fall over and the valve gets knocked off, they turn into a missile. So you have to chain them up so it doesn't happen for safety.
Right.
But just that string of them there, I was like, no, this is realistic. And I believe there was a character in the film who was actually a professor of physics or something. Maybe that person was the advisor, but somebody definitely helped them get that accurate. But in kind of a Can't Be Made Today thing, there's a gag where in the dorm room of Chris and Mitch, there is a bottled water dispenser.
Right.
And there are koi that are in the bottled water.
Right.
And that's not a reasonable place to raise koi, right? So then my note that I made while I was watching it is, how long did they have to be in there before the rules said you had to swap them out? They had to go swim into a bigger pool for a while.
Yeah, we forgot to watch the credits to see if no fish were harmed in the making of this film.
This might have been before we started putting that in there, so it's possible they weren't ever let out. They died and no one cared, but I'm hoping. But koi is a nice tie-in to Mud, because at Mud they had a fountain in front of the lecture halls, and it had some Italian Renaissance marble statue there that a rich person bought and put there that no one ever paid attention to, because in the pond were koi fish. And these things were big because, as you know, they live a long time and they grow over their life. And every single freshman tour, they tell the freshmen, whatever you do, do not feed them double-doubles. That is forbidden. It's a bad thing.
Specifically
it will
double
kill
doubles.
The koi. Yes.
I like it.
And you know what happens when you tell engineering students to not do something.
Any student.
Yeah. That's exactly what they go do. So much so that even without a double-double, if you stood close enough to the pond for them to see you, the surface would erupt with their mouths as they'd all swarm over and start ma, 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 which, of course, then led people to feed them double-doubles.
Of course.
They were well-fed fish.
I was hoping when you went down that road, that's the story you were going to tell.
Yeah, I try to fulfill on my promises.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else that you would like to note of the film Real Genius?
Oh, sure. When we talk about some of the dialogue, I thought it was funny. There's a line where Chris Knight says, "Rue the day, who talks like that?" Well, I do, Chris. I use the phrase rue the day. But there's a line in there where Chris has set up a party with some bikini babes for all the nerds at the school. Again, kind of on that border of maybe not quite appropriate, similar to Revenge of the Nerds.
Right.
Although there is no
it's
non-consensual
not
drugged
rapey.
interaction, yeah. But he makes a reference to the Wanda Trossler School of Beauty. And I think this is kind of funny because at Mud there is a student newspaper, the Muckraker, and people could write in their own editorials. And one fellow, I will reserve his name even though I remember it in case he's no longer proud of this, but he wrote an editorial saying the way to improve the school was to change Harvey Mudd to be a school of science, engineering, and beauticians. And his premise was you would then have attractive women that would attend the school.
Jeez.
So I think the 80 or so women who attended Mud at the time probably didn't
like
take
that.
take to that too kindly.
Right.
But I thought it was, again, very realistic because in a school of 500 nerds, one of them is going to think that's a funny joke.
Right.
So
Of the time.
yeah, I don't know if that's still the case. I'll have to defer to, okay, if you attend Caltech, MIT, Harvey Mudd, RPI, any of those kind of schools, go ahead and write in, let us know.
Right.
Like, have people gotten past that, or do they still think that would be a funny joke?
So speaking of kind of the ladies, what about a smoochie count?
Smoochy.
I know there was one made me feel a little nervous where Patty D'Arberville, I believe is how you say her name,
Right.
kind of came onto a 15-year-old Mitch.
Yeah, I didn't write that down. That was a little too rapey.
But then do we get a kiss from Mitch and
Jordan?
Yeah.
I didn't make a note of it. If we did, I missed it.
Yeah, I thought they did.
It seems right, but I didn't make note of one. So that could just be me missing the smoochy count. It is interesting that from a writing perspective, there is more of a romantic arc there than I remembered.
Oh.
Between the two of them. Now, I always liked the character of Jordan. It was probably my favorite character in the film. And so maybe that skewed I saw the film as more about her than about Mitch.
Right. And how about a driving review?
Okay, so there's a couple things in here that I have to mention. One is Kent drives this Citroen. So you know that he's going to be a total douche nozzle because he drives a French car, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's Hollywood shorthand.
Mm-hmm.
And his license plate has 7 letters on it, and I don't believe at 85 they had gone to 7 letters on the plates yet. Not quite sure about that. There's also a scene where, and you notice this, one of the characters is on a motorcycle and they're quote unquote hiding down like in this little like ditch. And then when the bad guy drives by, they basically burst up onto the road a la Chips and follow them. And there's nothing around. There are no other buildings. There's no other cars. How did that guy not notice this motorcycle jumping up onto the road behind him? Right. It was good writing from the stuntman, but that was, I don't know if that was exactly that. Yeah. And this doesn't maybe qualify strictly as automotive, but vehicle related. There's a whole bunch of action that happens on the inside of a B-1 bomber. Mm-hmm. And the fuselage is not that big. Like, not even by half. It's ridiculous.
Wait, you missed what type of car was Chris and Mitch driving when they got onto the base, when they were incognito?
I believe that was Kent's Citroen. They had borrowed his hoity French. It's a yellow Citroen.
Borrowed? He wouldn't have lent it to him. They had to have...
Okay, they stole it.
Yeah. I didn't know if it was his or the professor's.
As I recall, it was his yellow car, which also would have been suspicious. I have to say, shout out to Ernie Burkhart, who's a listener and a former MP in the United States Air Force. The MPs get a bad rap on this one. They're pretty bad at their job. I don't believe that if you work at a super secret Air Force base, you're that lax on letting randos in the gate.
Right.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And he could probably tell you more details about their badging, like if they had the right kind of badges and stuff.
I love it how Val is just like, just let me in. You're going to get in trouble if you look into this. We're both going to get in trouble. Just let me in. And the guy's like, oh, all right, I'll let you in.
Okay. I'm just supposed to protect our country from like foreign invaders, but you look trustworthy, so in you go.
Right. We have a massive weapon here on this facility, but go ahead. Go
totally
on in.
Top secret. We had security briefing last week, but I think this is covered. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's not a fair portrayal. We're sorry, Ernie.
Yeah, and there was actually one point where a guy salutes and his hand doesn't even look remotely correct for a salute. It's really one of those things where, they maybe could have worked a little harder on that, but it's a campy movie. Don't look too closely at it, I think.
So you read a lot of the trivia. Was there anything that we haven't covered already that you wanted to go over?
Actually, I did discover a connection to our very own podcast, kind of.
Wow.
That the cinematographer Vilmos Zsigmond was also the cinematographer on Jersey Girl, covered in a previous podcast.
Yeah, just a few weeks ago.
That's right. Same guy. Can you believe that?
That's awesome.
Yeah, so Kevin got to work with the Real Genius guy.
I feel like Kevin would have liked this film. Like, like us, he would have been 14, 15, because I think we're about the same age.
Well, there's a joke in there where Mitch says, "What is this?" And Chris says, "It's a penis stretcher. Want to try it?" I think Kevin would appreciate that humor.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So, should we do the numbers?
Let's do the numbers.
Okay. So, this film's budget was $8 million. Which I wonder if for the time, I mean, it sounds low for today's standards. Trying to think of other 80s films.
Well, they had to build a half dozen giant propane-powered popcorn poppers for the popcorn in the house scene.
I'd love to know what that gag, like that scene cost.
Right. And then the ice, they actually did ice the set for the ice skating and the dorm scenes.
Because I'm sure that home was a facade. I'm sure it wasn't a true home. You know what I'm saying? It's a movie set. I'm sure it was built just to basically destroy, but they destroyed a home.
Yes, they did. And that was all real popcorn. It was not visual effects.
Right. Yeah, you looked that up because you were curious. I was like, nah, it's styrofoam.
190,000 pounds of popcorn.
Popcorn.
Yeah.
All right. So it scored pretty well. It got a 7 on IMDb, which, as we know, that's pretty high for IMDb. And Rotten Tomatoes gave it a 74%, and the audience gave it an 83, which I think that sounds just about right. Because I think, especially people of our generation, I think really like this movie. I think it's become kind of a cult classic. The fact that Val is now going to Comic-Cons, I think, lends to...
Yeah, that's a good sign that it's got some traction.
Yeah, it was popular. It's about an hour and 48 minutes. It was rated PG. It's listed as a comedy, romance, sci-fi, which I thought that was interesting that it's like rom-com sci-fi kind of.
I wouldn't really say sci-fi. I mean, it's comedy and a romance. I don't think that it qualifies strictly as a rom-com because of Mitch's arc and Jordan's arc, but it is a comedy and a romance.
Yeah, it's like adventure light, I was going to say, because there is like this will they, won't they? Are they going to...
Right. And there's a bit of heist to it as he tries to find where Laszlo lives, and then they're going to foil the evil professor. So it's got a lot going on.
Yep. And it made $12.9 million domestically. Apparently they did not distribute it worldwide, or there are no numbers for worldwide. So it made a profit.
Easily, and I think it probably did great in videotape rentals.
Yeah.
So I think it made them a fair amount of money.
Yep. All right. So that is our episode for this week. Next week's film is going to be Admission with Tina Fey. It's a 2013 film. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Real Genius, and we're kicking off this month of college films. Let us know other college films that you guys like, and don't forget,
Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.
Thanks for listening to Dodge Movie Podcast with Christy and Mike Dodge of Dodge Media Productions. To find out more about this podcast and what we do, go to dodgemediaproductions.com. Subscribe, share, leave a comment, and tell us what we should watch next. Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.